It's a bit of an experiment, really. I just want to see whether YouTube lets me put a video up about the fake moon landings as I see them. I've been reading science fiction since I was a boy. I'm 50 years old. In fact, I've got a book here, right here, that I'll be starting at. Arthur C. Clarke actually invented satellites. I bet you didn't know that. But yeah, I've always been a fan of science fiction. I've always been interested in it. And I wanted to be an astronaut when I was a boy. I've even got an astronaut as my character for my music now. Captain Wild is an astronaut. So I'm well into it. But I decided just a few years ago that the moon landings never really happened, and I'm going to give you my reasons. Compelling reasons. Reasons that compelled me. Okay. First of all, there was no redundancy built into the program. There was no... You would not send one craft on its own on such a dangerous mission. You'd have at least two going in parallel. Just like the Channel Tunnel, you know, there's two tunnels, and every time a train goes through the Channel Tunnel, another one goes through a parallel tunnel with it. And if something goes wrong, you will get through the door, you go through the hatch to the other tunnel, and you can get through. They would do that when they're going all the way to the moon. Right, the Channel Tunnel is going under a tiny little bit of water. We're talking about going all the way to the moon. I'll get into motives later as well, but there's no protection against micrometeorites or radiation in the capsule. I have seen the capsule with my own eyes. I have been to the Science Museum in London, and that thing is not going to protect you against radiation or micrometeorites. At the speeds that they were travelling at, which I can't remember the speeds they were travelling at, but it was in the tens of thousands of miles per hour. I think it was something like 30,000 miles an hour. They would be decimated by a grain of sand hitting them. There was no protection. Then there's the Van Allen belts, the radiation levels in the Van Allen belts. If you were going to launch and avoid the Van Allen belts, you'd have to launch from the North or the South Pole. They didn't launch from the North or the South Pole. I don't know whether that's because they were supposed to be using the slingshot of the Earth to get them up to speed. But the fact is, if you were going to avoid the Van Allen belts, you would not launch from the middle of the Earth. You'd launch from the North or South Pole. Probably the South, because that's got land. They didn't. They didn't. Why not? Obviously, because they wanted it to be a spectacle and see it launched from America. But that's nonsense, absolutely nonsensical not to launch from the poles where there are no... you can avoid the magnetic... I'm not saying there's no magnetic fields, you can avoid them. Okay, batteries. We don't even have batteries now that would be able to power them for all the power requirements that they had for 3.5 days going up into space. 3.5 days to run air... Do you know how much power an air conditioner uses? And then you've got oxygen filtration systems, you've got lighting, you've got the actual servos on tilting the motors and stuff. You've got a certain amount of computing as well. You've got heating. You've got radios, and that radio has to transmit a very, very long way, and that's my next point, is the radio. I don't know a radio on the planet Earth that can transmit more than about 5 or 10 miles. Even a really powerful one. Yeah, they have more powerful ones out at sea and so on. But, again, those distances are nothing compared to going to the moon. The radio would have had to have been insanely powerful. And the batteries have to power all that. The needle in the haystack. I think this is the one that actually compelled me to believe that they didn't go to the moon, was the needle in the haystack. when they disconnected from the main craft and came down in the lander to the moon, they left the main craft rotating around the Earth, rotating around the moon, I should say. They then had to take off, find it, and get up to the correct speed with it. That is finding a needle in a haystack. Even if you're trying to find something on the surface of the moon, which is only one-dimensional, two-dimensional, but we're talking about three-dimensional. We're talking about trying to find something on the surface of the moon and making that three-dimensional, and be at the correct speed and trajectory to match up with it perfectly, and angle of attack, and angle of orientation. The variables in that are insane. Ridiculous. What's next? Well, I mean, I've seen a funny thing happen on the way to the moon, and I've seen them faking the shot through the glass. That is very compelling evidence when they were supposed to be halfway to the moon, but they were busy faking a shot. And it is time-stamped as them being halfway to the moon, but actually they're faking a shot through the window using a cutout of cardboard. That, to me, is pretty much hand in the cookie jar level of evidence. Okay. You will have to look up a funny thing happened on the way to the moon if you want to see that piece of evidence. But I think that is hand in the cookie jar. I've not heard NASA try to explain it, especially the date stamp, which is the date that they should have been halfway to the moon, and they were not. They weren't. Okay, where have we got to? The gravity. The moon is supposed to be a fifth gravity, but the astronauts could jump no higher than they can on Earth. Yes, they've got big heavy suits on, but again, that's a fifth of the weight. A fifth of the weight. So their suits should have weighed no more than just having a very lightweight backpack on. And then add to that their 1/5 gravity, and they should have been able to leap 6 feet into the air. They don't leap 6 feet into the air, ever. You've seen the waving flags. I'm not going to go into that because I think that it's very difficult to... we've had one of those Mythbuster things where they've really bent over backwards to try and make sure that a flag waves in a vacuum. They really tried hard to make sure, they've got the pole rotating in the ground. Well, sorry, but if you push a pole into a compacted fine dust, it doesn't rotate in the ground. It has to go into a metal tubular sleeve or something for it to rotate in the ground. So I don't believe that the flag rotated. But anyway, like I say, I don't want to get into that one because it's... You can believe that was not wind if you want to. You can kind of explain it to yourself. But it's pretty darned obvious to my eyes that thing was blowing in the wind. Enough for Bob Dylan to write a song about it, quite honestly. There was the point of them in the press conference saying that they couldn't see any stars. Again, that's just damning evidence because we've since heard that in space you can see the sky is festooned with stars, just as it is at night on a clear night on Earth. No, they couldn't see any stars. They said that was when they first came back, and they also kind of looked at each other to confirm that they were all going to say the same thing, because they clearly hadn't expected that question. And that was from Patrick. That was actually from Sir Patrick Moore, that question. There are some kind of photographic problems, but I don't really want to get into the photographic problems because shadows can appear to converge when they're actually parallel. I don't think that's firm evidence. I've upped the gamma on some of the original NASA photographs, but this was way back before the internet. You could, when you used to take 5 minutes to download a photo, I downloaded some NASA moon photos and in high resolution and upped the gamma until I could see the stars. in the sky, and you can actually see them in some of them. And I struggled to find the correct constellations. I couldn't see the correct constellations. So again, that's not evidence. It's not evidence. It's just indicative. It's a part of the investigation, looking for the stars in the photographs. Because if you turn up the brightness enough and you do enough filters, you ought to be able to find some bright stars, and you ought to be able to check their positions, and they should darn well be in those positions. We haven't been able to do that with any of the photographs from the moon, which is odd. I've seen people saying stuff doesn't fit in the lander. That's not, again, it's not what compelled me to believe it. The main thing that compelled me to believe it was A, surviving in the vacuum of space with micrometeorites, Van Allen belts, intense solar radiation. I know they had the gold-plated covers on their visors, but the intense radiation would have caused them to be incredibly hot in the sun, and they would have been incredibly cold in the shade and in the lander. And humans can survive quite cold temperatures, but not those kinds of temperatures. And I just don't believe that they could possibly have had the battery power to cover all that. But I think it's laughable to imagine that they had the battery power. Even if they had, like, heavy-duty car batteries. I have a heavy-duty car battery in here. If I was to plug my laptop in for 24 hours, I would drain the whole battery flat. And that's a heavy-duty car battery in the year 2020. Very heavy battery. What else is there? I think. I don't think. Well, you know, the landing, the actual landing of the module. I just don't think it's convincing that the shape of it and the angle and the way it was supposed to come in on its side and turn at the last minute. I just think it should have fallen over. I just don't see it. I just don't see that. You know, you're coming in with a lander like that, and then you're putting on the engines at the last minute, and then you're just kind of landing like that. I think you've got so much momentum going in this direction. You know, it doesn't matter that you've got thrust stopping it from going downwards. You've got no thrust stopping it from going sideways, and it's going to just keep tumbling, and it's going to go over. And that is exactly what happened in the Earth attempts at landing it, when they tried to attempt landing it in the Earth atmosphere, and Neil Armstrong had to eject. So I don't believe it's possible to land the lander like that. It might be with computer-controlled jets, but certainly not if you are being given your instructions on a radio with a 3-second delay or whatever it was. That's utterly ridiculous. The exactness and speed with which you would have to fire those retro rockets and so on, it wouldn't make sense that you could actually have that 3-second delay on the radio. And in any case, what on earth would they be able to see back at mission control that they would be able to give precise instructions? Surely the people on the spacecraft would be able to see the exact same thing, and they would react without the delay. So I mean, that's just laughable, utterly laughable. Another damning piece of evidence is the fact that there are no records of the actual journey at NASA. There's no records of the telemetry of the journey that was sent allegedly back and forth to the computers during the journey. None. Doesn't exist. It's got destroyed. And then the technology that they used to get to the moon has been destroyed, so they're not even quite sure exactly how the cooling and heating systems of the spacesuits work now. How did they manage to grip and control cameras with fingers that were absolutely inflated with air? That would have been... I know they had plastic inserts in the fingers, but I just... I don't know if you've ever tried to move your hand when it's inflated in a rubber glove by an air compressor. What else have we got? That's about it, really. I mean, Was it Arthur C. Clarke who said that the rocket needed to go to the moon would have to have been like 5 times? No, it wasn't. I'm not going to put words into his mouth. I did hear it said that that rocket had nowhere near the payload required to get all the way to the moon, but I can't remember where I heard that. And that is not part of the evidence that convinced me, but it's another thing you can look into. What else is there? Well, if we go to the flip side now, well, why would they lie about the moon? The answer is quite obvious: to draw huge amounts of money into a black ops organisation, NASA, which isn't accountable for a single penny of it. Things like, the lunar rover Jeep thing, which you can quite clearly see is the crappiest thing you've ever seen. You look at it closely in the photographs, it's cardboardy, it's really nothing more than a go-kart. It cost something like $1 billion in today's money, or $500 million, I think it was, in today's money. That's ridiculous. There's absolutely no way. Even looking at the spacecraft, if you go to the Science Museum, as I have, and look at the lunar lander, it is laughable. It's got big kind of cardboard panels on it, covered in what I can only describe as very thin gold-coloured foil. It is absolutely... I saw that as a child of about 9 years old and laughed at it. I didn't laugh at it, but I thought, I don't understand. Is this actually the lunar lander? Because I can't understand how that thing could possibly have survived in space. And that was when I was a child. I remember thinking, well, they must know something I don't. They must have some... they must know something about... Maybe incredibly fragile things are fine in space, I thought as a child. I just gave them the benefit of the doubt. I don't anymore, and I've been back to see it since, and it is an absolute joke, that lunar lander. The cruddy, crappy, cardboardy workmanship that they put together for the billions and billions of dollars that they took from the American taxpayer is criminal, really, quite honestly. It's a fraud and a scam running into trillions, probably, of dollars. I'm not saying that money didn't go anywhere useful for the American people. Probably went into some sort of military and black ops kind of stuff. But if you're going to do that, be accountable for your actions. Stand up like a man and say what you're going to spend the money on. Don't pretend to take it for one thing and actually put it into another, because that is called lying. We expect a little bit better from people who are supposedly call themselves leaders, although they don't really lead because they don't actually set an example that's worthy of following. But nominally leaders should really at least stand up and be counted for what they believe. At least have a pair of balls, stand up and be counted for what they're doing, and not hide behind one thing and then put the money into it because they're not clever enough to sell it, and they haven't got the balls to state they're going to do it, and they are deceptive enough to be spending the money on something that they don't want you to know they're spending it on. Let's just spend their own damn money on it then. If they want to spend money on something that their choice and not really yours, then they shouldn't be spending your money on it. They should be spending their own damn money on it. Anyway, that's a whole other issue, really. Why did Russia not want to out America? Well, quite obviously they had the same kind of budgetary siphon going on. They would have had the same, been using the exact same method of draining billions of dollars, or rubles in the case of Russia, into the black ops of their own Defense Department, so that the Cold War could continue. And everyone was building nuclear rockets and stuff, and that was probably where a lot of the money went, I would imagine, and trying to keep up with each other that way. And it's not very popular increasing defence spending to alarming levels, apart from the fact that it does alarm people. It's at the expense of other services to the people. So there's that. I mean, that's enough of an explanation for me as to why Russia didn't want to. You got to forget about it being Russia and America, like they're two different things. They're all just in one big club. You know, they're all just playing Monopoly with each other. So it's kind of irrelevant, actually. They're not actually competing with each other in the sense that you and I think that they are. And when they send us as little soldiers on their behalf to war with each other, that's not them competing with each other either. They'll meet each other as presidents or whatever and still shake each other's hands and have tea with each other and have a phone call. But you know, so don't be deceived by the fact that they're making us shoot at each other and kill each other and hate each other, because that's a whole different economic and diplomatic matter that actually is sometimes even planned, and certainly isn't part of their bigger game, which is their own personal survival as those higher monopoly pieces, the gold-plated monopoly pieces. And for them to survive as gold-plated monopoly pieces, they actually have to have the cooperation of the other monopoly pieces to some extent. They certainly have to at least know what the hell the others are doing. You know, we know that there were secret discussions between leaders of countries in all sorts of wars and leads up to wars that we'll never know about. That's it. That's my moon landing conspiracy. I didn't really want to get into the wars and everything, but just by way of explaining why didn't Russia tell out America on it? I think that's obvious why. I think those are the obvious reasons why I think that we didn't go there in the first place. If you still want to believe that we went to the moon, that's absolutely fine. I'm not gonna call you stupid. I'm not gonna say that you don't know what you're talking about. You look at the evidence yourself and you make your own mind up, and I'll respect whatever you think. If you think we went to the moon, then that's fine. And I think it's a beautiful thing to believe, actually. I think it's a wonderful thing to believe. I used to believe it myself. I wish I still could, but I just can't.